Hey everyone, I'm Casper, and I'm a historian that focuses on the Second Industrial Revolution. So if there's anyone out there who's a medieval historian or really into the history of archery, definitely drop a comment below because I just want to talk about a little thing in history because I just love the little details in history, and that is, did archers or soldiers reuse arrows? In so many movies, shows, and games, we see arrays of archers just losing volley after volley of thousands of arrows on the opposing army. And one of the things in the back of mind sometimes is, I wonder if after the battle they go around and pick those back up, or if they have, battlefield janitors to do that. Now, I practice archery quite a bit and have used it for hunting and sport shooting. Some of my field might also even overlap onto what want to talk about here when we're talking about very briefly the history of archery. And of course, I looked into some of this for the video. And the answer to that question earlier I posed is 100% probably, but it's not often recorded, or rather, there would have been some complications preventing a recycling of arrows, if you will. So, to give some context about arrows or bows, for those who may not be familiar, we humans have been using bows and arrows for at least the past 10,000 years, based on archaeological findings all over the world that also suggest humans may have used bows or similar tools for projectile weaponry even further back up to 60,000 or so years ago. I believe there's even a recent theory that's been floating around where some people are suggesting that one of the reasons the Neanderthals went extinct was that they may not have used bows and arrows to the same extent as the Homo sapien, and the competition, of course, was fierce. But just like with a lot of our tools and such, bows and arrows have evolved or have a huge variance to them. This here is a compound bow. It's not your typical bow one would find in, one would have found in Korea or in England. It's a modern variation. And the arrows I have here are of a completely different material with plastic veins, aluminum, maybe carbon fiber, depending on the arrow, compared to the more traditional arrows you see in movies or, other media with feathers or different materials for arrowheads. And that's really the first problem in collecting or recycling ammunition for bows. For example, in Mongolia, a lot of the arrowheads were made of bone, stone, maybe a mix of iron, and other materials, horn. North American arrows, we find antlers, shells, hardwood, flint. And of course, different arrows have different functionalities. Sometimes armor-piercing arrows, whistling or signal arrows, poisonous arrows. Sizes of bows and arrows were different. Do you make your bow of willow? Do you use pine? Do you use spruce? Do you use cedar? Do you use dogwood? What do you use for the shaft of the arrow? How long is the arrow? So just based on that alone, it may have just been impractical depending on the period of time to try to reuse somebody else's ammunition. There's also collection complications. So when an arrow goes into a body, it can get broken, fragmented, stuck in bodies. An arrow can actually sever nerves. It can break or fracture bones depending on the impact. And arrowheads, depending on the material, can be bent, blunted, or just broken. And that's assuming you can even find arrows in certain environments after battle or during battle. If any of you have gone actually hunting with arrows, you'll know that sometimes it's really hard to find arrows. And what's really cool is we've probably found at battle sites or dig sites an arrow or arrowhead some soldier or archer may have looked for and just gave up on. And so, the manufacturing complications tie in directly with logistical complications. And what I mean by logistical complications is, the very creation or fletching, the art of fletchery for, assembling both bows and arrows. We take a lot of things today for granted. The very clothes we wear, the utensils or tools we use, even, weapons, right, that we use today are mass manufactured. They are factory produced most of the time. There's a lot of things in our lives that used to be the sole profession of a craftsman, of a particular smith, or someone very, trained in producing that very good. And that was the case for arrows. And so when you're making arrows, it got really expensive back then, depending on the quantity, also quality, right? What kind of materials you use. So that ties in with the manufacturing complications, because I mentioned this, what usually happened with armies when supplying of arrows or munitions or even food was that you typically had your own logistics for it. You often had baggage trains or maybe supply runners for arrows to supply archers, or in the event of maybe a regiment of archers running out of munitions, they would be swapped out with another group of archers. So there were different ways depending on the time period and of course region how to approach running out of ammunition. Now, this isn't to say that there are no recorded cases of soldiers or archers reusing arrows or munitions. For example, the Battle of Towton in 1461 during the famous Wars of the Roses in England, undoubtedly one of the bloodiest battles of that period. There is an account where a lot of the arrows would land in the snow, and of course that might prevent damage to the arrows, and soldiers would be ordered to reuse those arrows and pick them back up and just reuse them. There are accounts of some Native American tribes on the eastern coast of today's United States of America that were observed to have tried to recover at least the shafts of their arrows if they could find them after hunting or a skirmish. If you are to also believe the more embellished events of the Battle of Red Cliffs during the Three Kingdoms period in China from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, then Zhuge Liang's ploy of using straw dummies to collect 100,000 arrows from Cao Cao's invading army would certainly be another potential example. I'm sure in desperate situations where materials, ammunition, and really just supplies in general wasn't at an all-time low, such as the events of the First Crusade, there would have been archers or soldiers that would have tried to scavenge or recover arrows to reuse. It just seems to be one of those things where they probably did it, or if they didn't, it was probably because of all these complications, or if they did sometimes, not a lot of people thought to record it for the history books because it just came with the nature of warfare. So just to kind of reiterate, yeah, probably people did try to reuse, and probably there were instances of misuse because, depending on the make of the arrow, or if it's just not really done, or rather assembled correctly or made correctly, it can actually be thrown off on trajectory. It can be it can really cause damage. It can splinter. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want more of these little dots for history. I particularly enjoyed this one because it just kind of put me down in a little bit of a rabbit hole with the history of archery, but also the complications things can arrive with, especially if you're going to reuse arrows or without really repairing them, because probably, if you were to reuse an arrow for yourself that you had loosed, you probably would have had to repair it or done some modifications to it, depending on what happened to it. Say if it hit armor, or if it, was in somebody who's dead. So yeah, definitely let me know down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.